I collided with a woman in the palace corridor and spent 5 minutes apologizing while helping her collect scattered scrolls, and I had absolutely no idea I was on my knees picking up documents for the Empress, who had rejected every suitor for 300 years. Dr. James Wright, an esteemed xenolinguist from Earth, adjusted his glasses as he hurried down the palace corridor of Keth'Vari, studying a stack of trade agreements and cultural protocols. Papers were essential to establishing diplomatic relations between their worlds. He barely noticed when he bumped into someone at the corner, his eyes never leaving those precious documents until they suddenly flew out of his hands. As James scrambled to retrieve them, an indignant voice cut through the chaos. "Watch where you're going." He looked up just in time to see a woman dressed plainly yet regally. Her scrolls were scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. She was seated on the ground beside him, her crimson skin illuminated by the palace's dim lights. James dropped to his knees instantly and began gathering both their papers with fervent apologies. "I'm so sorry. My fault entirely." She watched in surprise as he, who organized her scrolls first, even though they were not his responsibility. No one had ever treated her this way before, not since she ascended the throne 3 centuries ago. "I apologize again," James said earnestly once both sets of documents lay neatly on a nearby rug. "Are you all right? I should have been watching where I was going." She took in his simple academic attire and the honest kindness written across his face as he bowed before her, still kneeling with respect despite their relative stations being unknown. "I am fine," she replied softly, after several moments of silence, studying him intently. "Thank you." His smile broke through again then, genuine without pretense or ulterior motive. It struck a chord within the Empress that had long remained untouched by such sincerity. "It's my duty to make sure no harm comes from a meeting like this," he offered with another slight bow, rising now and taking his documents in hand. "Goodbye." And just as quickly as their encounter began, James continued on his way down the corridor, no sign of urgency, but also not a moment wasted either. The woman watched him go for several long moments before she rose herself from her sitting position against the cold floor tiles and made her way back to her chambers with an unusual lightness in her step. In all her years ruling Keth'Vari, no one had ever done something so simple yet profound as simply helping her pick up fallen papers. Her servants found their Empress 20 minutes later still lingering where she left James, standing, holding tightly onto the scrolls they both had gathered together and smiling quietly to herself despite her normally stoic demeanor. They were quite confused but said nothing, observing how out of character this moment was for Veyra. "Your Majesty?" one servant inquired cautiously as they drew near again. The others followed their lead immediately, bowing low before the figure seated regally once more atop a large armchair beside an ornate fireplace. She turned to face them with those piercing gold eyes narrowed slightly, but not from anger, merely curiosity mixed with reflection. "Find me this human," she commanded suddenly, after several seconds of silence between them all. The servants exchanged surprised glances before hurriedly bowing again and scurrying off to obey their Empress' command without further question, an unprecedented request indeed given Veyra's usual reserve around such matters. In that quiet moment alone amidst the palace grandeur, Dr. James Wright had managed not only to catch her attention, but also to challenge centuries of guarded solitude with a simple act of kindness and respect for another being's dignity regardless of status or power differential, a lesson both unexpected and deeply moving indeed within these halls, accustomed solely to deference without genuine human connection, since before many lifetimes ago on Keth'Vari. The next morning Dr. James Wright woke up in his modest quarters within Keth'Vari's grand palace. He had settled into a routine that was both monotonous and critical. Trade negotiations required meticulous attention to detail and patience beyond measure. Today's session promised more of the same. James joined his fellow diplomats from Earth, their faces already lined with tiredness, but focused nonetheless. They sat in an expansive meeting room adorned with Keth'Vari tapestries depicting battles long past. The air was thick with anticipation as representatives of both worlds began reviewing trade terms and cultural exchanges that could forge a new chapter for interstellar relations. The negotiations dragged on, each side pushing their interests without yielding easily. James' background in diplomacy made him the calmest presence among his team. He handled every demand from Keth'Vari's dignitaries with an unwavering composure, explaining Earth's positions clearly and maintaining a respectful demeanor at all times. His patience was tested but never broken. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the meeting room exploded inward in a burst of power. Everyone's eyes widened as they instinctively dropped to their knees, heads bowed low in reverence for whoever had entered with such dramatic flair. Except James, caught off guard and unprepared by this protocol, he fell into his respectful bow only after everyone else. As he lifted his head slowly from the floor, a figure moved through the room like an imperial breeze. Empress Veyra herself, draped in full regalia that seemed to catch every beam of light. Her crimson skin glowed with power and authority. Her piercing gold eyes scanned the room with commanding precision before locking on to James. His heart skipped a beat as recognition washed over him. She was the woman from yesterday's corridor encounter, the very empress who had rejected suitors for centuries, now standing directly in front of him in all her imperial splendor. Empress Veyra approached James slowly, her footsteps echoing ominously against the tiled floor. She stopped before him and pointed down at his bowed figure. "That one," she commanded, addressing her advisors with a voice that brooked no argument. "Begin the wedding preparations." Silence filled the room like a thick fog, hanging heavy over everyone present. Then chaos erupted, nobles shouting in disbelief, Veyra's advisors sputtering objections, and finally, the Grand Vizier standing up to scream out his protests against this outrageous decision. James found himself unable to move from where he knelt until one of her guards gently lifted him by the arm, setting him back on his feet. The sudden shift in authority and circumstance left him dazed. All that ran through his mind was confusion. "Your Majesty," James began, finding his voice amidst the pandemonium, "what is happening?" The Empress looked down at him again, her gaze softening just barely under the weight of centuries alone atop this throne. She spoke with quiet certainty. "You helped me without knowing who I was," she explained simply. That simple act broke through 300 years of walls. Turning away from James's stunned form and his still, kneeling team, Veyra continued her command to the room. "The wedding is in 1 month. Prepare him." And then she left as suddenly as she had entered, her robes swirling behind her like a crimson tornado that threatened to sweep everything before it into its wake. James remained rooted where he stood, still processing what had just transpired around him. His team stared back at him with equal parts shock and bewilderment. "What did you do?" whispered one of his colleagues tentatively from the floor beside him. He shook his head dumbly in response. There was no explanation for this turn of events, nothing he could say to make sense out of it. James still couldn't believe that a simple act of kindness had resulted in an imperial wedding proposal centuries in the making and now seemingly about to be realized. The guards led him away from the meeting room towards what must have been his new quarters, or at least the place where preparations for this unthought of union would begin. His delegation left behind, no doubt more confused than ever by their current predicament. James was too stunned by everything unfolding around him to resist, even if he wanted. Every step taken felt like a dream moving forward into reality. As they went deeper within Keth'Vari's grand halls, the whispers of astonished officials and servants alike filled his ears. Yet another reminder that nothing about this situation would be normal or easy. All James could do was hope somehow to understand what had happened between him and their empress. Perhaps then he might find a way through this bewildering arrangement set forth by forces beyond comprehension. James still stood there, disoriented and unsure of how to proceed. or even think after everything that just transpired in the meeting room. His heart raced with questions and uncertainties as his mind replayed Veyra's words over and over again. You helped me without knowing who I was. The simple act had indeed undid centuries of walls built up around her, revealing a vulnerability he hadn't expected from someone so powerful and guarded. As the guards led him away towards what would be their wedding preparations, James felt like an observer in his own life. He couldn't fathom how such a drastic change could come about based on one encounter that had lasted mere minutes. Yet here they were, the start of something entirely unpredictable, set to unfold over the next month with no clear end game. The Empress's words echoed back through the corridors. Prepare him. So he would be prepared, though what lay ahead remained shrouded in mystery and uncertainty. James found himself standing outside a grand suite within Keth'Vari's palace, the doors slowly closing behind his guard escorts. Inside awaited an entirely new chapter of his life, a future that only moments ago seemed impossible to conceive, but now stood before him, with all its complexities and challenges laid bare beneath layers of imperial protocol and tradition. He took one deep breath before stepping forward into this unknown territory, ready for whatever the next month would bring. As he prepared himself, not just physically or emotionally, but also mentally, knowing full well that what lay ahead was nothing short of extraordinary. James was led through labyrinthine corridors, each room more opulent than the last. The walls gleamed in deep shades of crimson and gold, adorned with intricate carvings that told tales of Keth'Vari's ancient past. Servants bowed as they passed by, their eyes wide at his presence. He couldn't shake the feeling of being a character from someone else's story, a dream where reality blurred into impossibility. Finally, he arrived in front of an enormous set of double doors flanked by guards whose golden armor gleamed under the palace's dim light. The doors opened with a soft click to reveal a chamber more luxurious than any James had ever imagined. Silk tapestries hung from every wall, depicting scenes of grandeur and battles long past. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow across the room's opulent furnishings. "Wait here," one guard instructed him in stilted human Keth'Vari, his tone devoid of emotion, as if he too couldn't comprehend why this was happening. James nodded numbly, taking stock of where he stood, not exactly a prisoner but certainly under constant watch. He wondered how long it would take for reality to catch up with the surreal circumstances unfolding around him. Hours passed in what felt like an eternity before Empress Veyra entered without preamble or fanfare. Her crimson skin seemed darker against the room's rich tapestries, her deep gold eyes piercing and unwavering as they met his own hazel gaze behind glasses. She wore no heavy regalia today, instead a simpler gown that still spoke of power and grace. "You may dismiss them," Veyra commanded to one guard before turning fully towards James. The guards left silently with bowed heads, the door clicking shut once more into silence thick enough to slice through. Only then did she speak in her deep voice, which carried both authority and a new level of vulnerability he hadn't seen from this ancient ruler. "Your Majesty," James began hesitantly, his respect tempered by confusion. "I am honored, but I must confess these is bewildering." Veyra took the seat across him, folding her hands delicately atop the ornate table between them. Her eyes never left his face as she spoke again. "For 300 years, every person who approached me wanted something: power, influence, access to my throne or body, my favor. Not once have I met someone like you." She paused here, studying him closely before continuing with a quiet intensity that made James feel both smaller and larger than he ever had been. "You helped me without knowing who I was," she explained softly. "You apologized because we bumped into each other. You asked if I was all right after picking up the papers I dropped. No one has seen me as anything but the Empress in 3 centuries. James felt a strange warmth spreading through him at her words, yet he couldn't help asking, "But what if you are wrong about me? What if kindness is just an illusion?" Her voice softened further as she leaned back slightly, regarding him intently. "I have read every report on your work and behavior from all angles: colleagues, subordinates, even the servants who serve you tea. She stood up then, walking slowly towards James until they were mere feet apart. He could see now how small he truly was compared to her imposing presence. "You give money to poor students," she said firmly. Closer still, "you help colleagues without taking credit for their work. You thank the servants by name as if it matters. In a universe filled with ambition and selfishness, you are genuinely kind." Their eyes met. At this point Veyra's gaze held both challenge and something else he couldn't quite place. "Kindness should not be rare," James offered quietly but firmly, meeting her steady regard head on. Veyra stared back for a long moment before breaking into laughter that sounded like a bell chiming through the silence. It was a sound she hadn't made in centuries. Yes, a real laugh born of genuine joy and unexpected relief at finding someone who looked past titles and power to see humanity itself. "Yes," Veyra agreed once her laughter subsided, smiling softly now as James met her eyes directly, unflinching under scrutiny that cut through pretense. "Kindness should not be rare, but it is." She took his hand then in hers, a gesture that felt both intimate and formal at the same time. "Will you have me?" James looked into those piercing gold eyes once more before answering. "Can I ask for one thing?" Veyra tensed slightly yet nodded almost imperceptibly. "Teach me your language properly," he asked with a smile, knowing it was something small but meaningful in the face of this monumental shift. His accent had been terrible at their first meeting, something they both shared now, as she began teaching him her native tongue without another word spoken between them beyond simple phrases and lessons. They stood there together, under the palace's grand chandeliers, a moment suspended within history, a new chapter begun through an act of kindness that shattered centuries-old walls and forged unimagined bonds. The grand hall was bustling on day 3 as Grand Vizier Keth announced his latest challenge to Dr. James Wright, a scholar from Earth, who had somehow caught the eye of Empress Veyra herself, for ruler whose heart hadn't been swayed by any suitor in centuries. "Today," Keth declared with an arrogant smirk, "the human must prove himself worthy in combat." James shook his head politely but firmly. "I am not a warrior, Grand Vizier. My worth is measured through intellect and diplomacy." Keth's sneer deepened. "Then if you cannot fight, perhaps the arena of your mind? You might fare better there." "Linguistics," James replied instantly, eyes gleaming with challenge beneath his glasses. The court erupted into laughter at this suggestion, but a few faces held expressions of respect and admiration for James's unwavering honesty. Among them was Empress Veyra's personal guard, who watched from the shadows, an approving nod visible to no one else save her keen eye. Days passed with Keth growing increasingly desperate in his attempts to undermine James. On day 7, whispers began circulating about alleged infidelity on part of Dr. Wright. The council gathered and demanded a thorough investigation into every aspect of his life. They pored over transcripts from diplomatic missions, personal correspondence, even the meticulous records kept by Veyra's servants regarding any guests staying within her palace walls. Incredulously enough, James emerged unscathed. His history was as clean as glass. There were no secret relationships. He had been too busy with books and language lessons to entertain romantic entanglements at all during his tenure here on Keth'Vari. By the 12th day of Keth's relentless harassment, a new twist threatened to end it all. Poison slipped into James' food during dinner. He fell violently ill that night, delirious hallucinations blurring time and memory as he fought for life itself against an unseen assailant who wished him dead. Yet even in the depths of his fever-induced agony, Empress Veyra never wavered. She watched over him personally, her guards barred from entering, while she attended to James' every need with care that bordered on reverent tenderness. When James finally awoke after days near death's door, he found himself staring into the concerned gold eyes of his mysterious protector. "You are safe now," Veyra murmured softly, as if reading his thoughts aloud for comfort. A shiver ran through him despite her words. Knowing full well what had transpired, and who stood behind such a bold act against them both. He looked up at Empress Veyra, with gratitude etched upon every line of his weathered face, eyes red-rimmed from illness, but holding resolve steady nonetheless. "Who?" he croaked weakly, voice hoarse yet determined to seek out justice now that survival no longer hung by threads. Veyra stood up sharply then, summoning her guards immediately. "You are recovering," she stated firmly, before turning towards the door where Keth awaited outside, with smug certainty written across his narrow features. The Empress led him back into chambers once more for judgment in front of a court stunned by turn of events. "You tried to kill my chosen," Veyra declared, voice icy as winter's frost biting through flesh. Keth sneered unabashedly. "He is beneath you. A primitive scholar. He will embarrass our empire." Empress's eyes narrowed dangerously before she leaned closer so her words carried weight of centuries in their wake. "You treated me with manipulation for decades while I trusted this man, oh, James, with my life and secrets because he saw past titles to compassion itself." With that final damning statement delivered amidst silence heavy enough to crack under strain, Keth was dragged away into prison cells meant solely for traitors of state. James slowly recovered over the following weeks, with daily visits from Veyra herself, who brought him news about 300 lonely years spent ruling alone. They talked late nights, filled only by them against backdrop of stately grandeur now softened around edges, where she smiled freely at jokes that made her laugh ain sound so rare, becoming James' favorite thing in world since learning it existed. Months turned into seasons, their bond deepened steadily beneath surface interactions. When wedding day finally came to announce union between human and alien, shock rippled through galaxy, unprepared for love story that transcended mere politics or power struggles born out of duty alone. Years later, as James aged gracefully, grays peppered in hair, while silver skin remained timeless under Empress Veyra's touch, Thea often reminisced about first meeting when chance encounter had set everything into motion. "Do you regret choosing me?" he asked one evening, holding her hand tightly between theirs amidst candlelight, flickering shadows on walls filled with tapestries showing scenes of past glory and battles won together, now too intertwined to separate again, willingly evermore. She held him closer then, silver skin against weathered human. "One lifetime seeing truly is worth more than millennia worshipped blindly." And so she kissed him deeply under starlit skies painted gold by her gaze, promise bound tight within lips meeting softly in embrace that sealed destinies forever entwined through kindness seen clear across galaxies. Especially because of the accent, he smiled, feeling warmth spread throughout his being from laughter that resonated still as pure joy echoing into eternity.